The following program is brought to you in living color.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of This Week in TV History. And it's Christmas time again.
Yep. Again.
So I have Donna with me, and oh, by the way, I should mention, you can hear us on TV Confidential, a radio talk show about television. Our good friend Ed Robertson does a lot of wonderful shows. He has interviews with people who have been on camera and behind the scenes, and we talk a lot about television history on the show and just have a nice unrehearsed dialogue about some of our favorite moments. And that's kind of what I wanted to create here.
Okay.
A little unrehearsed dialogue, even though you know the topic matter because it's written right down there. No, I have some of the stats right there.
Is that what we're talking about?
That's what we're talking about. Actually, let me first set up. About this time last year, when we were all sequestered at home,
we were locked down.
We were in lockdown.
Okay.
We had a lockdown Christmas. We did something. We did not disclose it to each other. We had lists of our favorite Christmas specials, the things that we were going to watch. And, of course, and the Hallmark movies, which is now Hallmark, Ion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we had all the specials. And high on your list was the Waltons. Well, actually, it was called The Homecoming, A Christmas Story by Earl Hamner, which would later become the Waltons.
So this was actually the pilot of the Waltons TV series.
This is basically,
forever.
For 8 years. And then specials that would follow. I don't want to confuse because this year the CW premiered the Waltons, The Homecoming. So it's kind of
which was not a Christmas story, even though it was a Christmas story.
It was a Christmas story, yes. But it was not a Christmas story. It was
a Christmas story.
It was a Christmas.
But it wasn't called a Christmas story.
Yeah, because that movie, Christmas Story, is the movie with Peter Billingsley, and that's the one that was set in the Midwest 50 years ago.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, Christmas Story. Yeah. Wasn't that the one? Yeah, you shoot your eye out. Yeah.
Oh.
But I digress, but I do that often. Anyway, so this was something, and I don't know if you noticed on my notes there, it premiered on CBS December 19th, 1971.
Wait a minute.
Which is today that we are recording this.
Wow.
So it will be out there in YouTube land and as a podcast later on. But I just discovered it was 50 years ago today that aired on CBS. By the way, 50 years ago yesterday was the premiere of The Grinch. But again, I digress. So anyway, I wanted to talk about this one specifically with you because you really love this Christmas special.
I love that. There's just something about that series. There's so many themes. I mean, not just Christmas, but family. It was a coming-of-age story. It was a story that took place during this country's Great Depression, friendship, and a homecoming. We would probably debate that for hours. The larger scope of the phrase homecoming. But right now, just focus on a father coming home.
Yeah, I didn't think of other takes on the term homecoming. No, it was about the father coming home. Earl Hamner Jr. wrote this story. He wrote another story that you could also say is part of the origin story of the Waltons called Spencer's Mountain. So but when it came time to do this one, he couldn't use the characters that were used in Spencer's Mountain because a different studio owned the rights to that. So he basically took the same idea and just changed the name, and that's how they became the Waltons.
So this was semi-autobiographical?
Yeah, this is Earl Hamner Jr. Yeah, Earl Hamner Jr. basically is John
Boy Walton. Yes.
John Boy Walton. And he is the narrator in this special, and then he was the narrator throughout the run of the series. So that's another element, is Earl Hamner's narration. So with this and then the rest of the series. I heard Richard Thomas say that when he read the script, the part that he was really looking forward to do was the narrations at the beginning and the end. And then they had to tell him, oh, you're not doing that. Earl is doing that.
However, in the CW's version of it, which aired fairly recently, Richard Thomas does do the narration.
Yeah,
And in my opinion, that was my favorite part of the CW Homecoming movie.
Yeah.
It just, there was something about hearing that familiar voice. And I've always maintained that Richard Thomas is probably one of the most underrated actors in this country. He is amazing.
It is, I agree. Richard Thomas was the best part of that special. But it was kind of almost a full circle.
Yes.
That Richard Thomas basically is John Boy now, all grown up into the future. But also, him adding that just added almost like a stamp of approval for this project.
Okay.
It did
Some sort of legitimacy?
Some sort of legitimacy. But the thing, when and I know we're jumping into the Waltons, so the 50th anniversary will be this fall of 22 of the premiere of the Waltons. But you would hear John Boy narrate when he was thinking in the present, and Earl Hamner was John Boy, reflective on the past or setting up the story, right? But when John Boy is, writing, his thoughts, that's Richard Thomas, which is also so beautifully done.
Yes.
And Richard Thomas tried very hard, spent a lot of time with Earl Hamner just to capture that Virginian accent, because
Virginia
Richard Thomas,
or West Virginia?
well, it'd be the Blue Ridge Mountains of, yeah. So, no, it's Virginia. It is Virginia. It is. Are you gonna look on the phone?
I think I have to look this up.
You're gonna look this up. Okay.
Okay.
So
Keep talking.
I'll keep talking. So we have Richard Thomas as John Boy, who we love, in any incarnation. The mother for this is Patricia Neal,
who came from the Broadway stage, had a stellar career,
Mhm.
who was just as the mother in this series.
She
Oh.
was.
You felt.
You felt, and just, what are you doing up there, boy? And just, but also having to give her son, I would say, a pep talk. Okay, you're grown up. You need to take the responsibility and go find your father. Even though she kept calling him boy and John Boy and such, you had to do that. Grandpa was played by Edgar Bergen, Candice Bergen's dad.
Yes.
Also the best, most popular ventriloquist on radio.
Okay.
Yes, I know. I said the most popular ventriloquist on the radio.
And there was something about his characterization of the grandfather.
Yeah.
You loved him. He was tough.
He was tough. He was fun.
Yes.
Obviously, he was a fun grandpa, and his style of discipline was a little different than their mother and their grandmother. Grandma ruled with an iron fist.
Yes, she did.
She was no nonsense. Grandpa would command respect, because there is a point where John Boy, in this one, is actually doing an impression of President Roosevelt.
Oh, yeah.
And he gets admonished. That's our president. You don't do that. But also, and this is something I think Will Geer carried the legacy on so beautifully, the idea that the Waltons don't really own the mountain. They are just the caretakers of the mountain.
Yes.
They are there to nurture it and make sure that it's safe and that it's cared for. And I think that basic element is what Will Geer would later just. But was
there a subtle environmental message?
I think there was an incredible.
I never even thought about that.
Back then, it was ecology.
Yes. Okay.
But there was a definite ecological message over there, how we are just the caretakers of the land.
A lot of respect for the land and the mountain.
Yes, a lot of respect for the land and the mountain. And, they go out to chop down the Christmas tree, but that was a Christmas tree that, Grandpa planted, and that's a Christmas tree that Grandpa's going to replace, at some time in the future. You don't take from the land without giving back. Mm-hmm. And I think that came there. And like I said, later on, Will Geer took that, but that's who Will Geer was in real life. Yes. And then they said, no, what you saw as Grandpa, that was Will. But Edgar, to see him in that role, but to see that there was this kind grandfather, but he did lay down the law. There were certain rules to how you're supposed to live your life. Yes. And he had that philosophy.
And then there were a few surprising characters.
Which ones are you thinking of?
Well, First of all, Cleavon Little,
Oh, yeah.
as the minister of the Black Church, who comes to the aid of John Boy Walton to help him find his father.
But also, he is the leader of the Black Church, but he's also a good friend of the Baldwin sisters.
Who are two women just surprising. The unsuspecting bootleggers.
Yes, well, they were bootleggers, I guess, during the time of Prohibition. Otherwise,
But did they know what the recipe?
I
really
don't
was?
believe they knew this was Papa's recipe.
And Papa had quite a history.
Yeah, the Judge Baldwin, who had been long gone by the time this story begins, but Judge Baldwin and the Baldwins before, this was a tradition that was passed down from generation to generation.
The recipe.
Yes, this is more of an elixir. And I don't know, you look at that now because you knew that was done on location. That was not fake snow. You know,
Where did they shoot that in Montana?
I think they shot that in,
Yeah.
even though it's supposed to be Virginia.
Yeah. Virginia, you were right.
And then the series was shot on the Warner Brothers lot.
Yes.
So never quite as snowy when it was shot. But that looked real.
Yes.
That looked real. You wanted that recipe. You needed that as your antifreeze because that was and the date, the Christmas, that was 1933. That was like 2 weeks after Prohibition was repealed. I did have to look that up.
Okay.
So that was just a couple of weeks after Prohibition was repealed. But
Olivia Walton, just no liquor in her house.
No liquor in this house, yeah. And Grandma kind of felt the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Later on in the series, if you would ever go out to where the mill was, you would always see little jars on the back shelves over there. But
one of my favorite scenes is actually Cleavon Little, Richard Thomas, and the Baldwin sisters.
In the sleigh.
Actually, in the house.
Oh, where they had to sing.
Yes.
They had to sing.
Not too many spoilers, but John Boy needs gas to put in the car to go find his father. And who would have gas? The Baldwin sisters. And Cleavon Little, nope, there's a way to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Take your time. You sit there, you sing, you...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't cut to the chase. There's a whole...
And when he does finally do it, it's just such a wonderful moment.
And Cleavon Little was so good with, you think of Blazing Saddles, and I can think of every other project where he's kind of the straight man and kind of setting the tone. And to work with, theatrically trained young man, Richard Thomas, and to have that comedic, because this is not a comedy, but you do have that moment, and to work off of Cleavon Little. And
Cleavon Little, who was known for his comedy. I mean, on Broadway, he was he in Pearly?
I believe he was in Pearly.
He was in Pearly. He was in a short-lived TV series. Actually, I suppose it's technically 2 TV series, Temperatures Rising.
Temperatures Rising.
And the new Temperatures Rising. One season, and ABC tried to revamp it. I loved both seasons. I mean, I loved the cast, and I especially loved Cleavon Little. Again, playing straight man in a hospital, a sitcom set in a hospital.
Yeah. But when the characters, he's always the smartest man in the room.
Yes.
And I would say I would have loved to have seen him work with Robert Guillaume.
Oh,
because of the way they work. Maybe they did. We have to look. Broadway also, what was it? I'm Not Rappaport, or he did with Judge Hirsch, and again,
he has quite a resume.
He has quite a resume, and just every scene that he's in. But you see him as the minister, and this is a minister that lives by the golden rule and follows the good book. But he knows in order to survive, he's got to, work with the Baldwin sisters. But he also knows they are a little bit clueless to what Papa's recipe is.
They're extremely clueless.
Yes, and he is not going to do anything that would tarnish their memory of their father, and be very respectful of that.
Another one of my favorite scenes is the scene with the missionary lady giving away toys. The Walton children are not permitted to accept any toys from the missionary lady because that would be charity, and they do not accept charity. But the kids ask, well, can we go down and watch?
Mm-hmm.
And sure, the missionary lady is there, but in order to get a gift, a toy, you had to say a Bible verse.
Mhm.
And the Walton kids were giving the rest of the kids Bible verses. My favorite was John Boy's later on, which was
Well, it was Mary Ellen giving.
Mary Ellen.
And then when she was tapped out, John Boy had
one from the Song of Solomon. And the poor missionary lady. I mean, it was a valid Bible quote.
Yeah, no, it counted.
I mean, Jesus wept. Not that one, which was given.
Yeah.
But
that was the short one. So Jesus wept. Jesus wept. There you go.
That is the shortest one.
Yeah, that is the shortest one. It counted. Yeah.
Yep.
And then then it gets heavy because Elizabeth gets something and it's broke. But she goes, it's dead, and so that was very heartbreaking. But yeah.
It was such a wonderful scene that was up, and then to have it crushed down. I mean, again, is Father going to make it home?
Yeah.
Is he going to make it home? And actually, I mean, for people who haven't seen it, I don't know. Should we go there? The homecoming.
Yeah.
Is there a homecoming?
There is a homecoming. Otherwise, the series would probably be very different. But
And would have ended, and
Yeah,
there would have been 8 seasons of the Waltons.
And the father was played by Andrew Andrew Duggan, right? Who's given guest starring credit because he only appears in the end.
You do hear him in voiceover at one point, but the end, that last scene with him and his family, it's riveting. The kids are riveted to his story, but I remember whenever I see it, I'm like, what happened next? What happened next?
Yes. No, he has a great story of how he got toys from Santa and giving it to the kids.
And how he got home.
Yeah. And then he has flowers for Olivia. He has gifts for Grandma and Grandpa, but he gives writing tablets to John Boy.
Which shows his support.
Yeah.
Which was John Boy question, would the family accept him being a writer? That's what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
I mean, his mother was wondering, what are you doing locked in your room?
And the idea...
Are you smoking?
Yeah. Well, they didn't have Playboy back then. So, no. I guess it was the Police Gazette. But the idea that, and the way he phrases it, I don't know much about the writing trade. But I know, you have to practice, and giving him like a stack of writing tablets so John Boy could jot down his thoughts.
There's so many beautiful moments in the homecoming Christmas story. Just so many throughout the entire movie. That just really brings you in. I don't like to use slow moving.
By modern standards,
it is. It is slower, but this show pulls you in, and you are involved in this family and their lives, and it's just a beautiful story. Introduced us to a lot. I mean, how many Walton children were there? A lot of good young actors.
Yes.
Your seasoned actors. And
kids that were just being kids.
And
that eventually grew and evolved, and every one of these kids had their own story. Eventually, they got to flesh it out. So you got to meet them in the early stages. I do want to also mention Ellen Corby as Grandma. I mean, she was a no-nonsense woman. Ellen Corby, also because she always was the strict disciplinarian. Story goes that she talked to Earl Hamner when she read the script. She said, "Everybody here is so sweet. You got to have something that's sour here." But Ellen Corby is based on Earl Hamner's real grandmother, who was such a sweet woman, and that's what he embodied, in the script. But she was saying, "No, you can't have everybody this sweet."
But family was everything.
Yeah.
This woman loved fiercely, but you did not want to cross her.
You didn't want to cross her. But there were other things. She would, Grandpa was that old fool anytime that he had some crazy idea. Or even when he was just being silly with the kids, there was that old fool. But I think is a wonderful moment where William Wyndon,
Mm-hmm.
who delivers a turkey, and we find out he didn't shoot this turkey himself.
He was
a
Depression era Robin Hood.
A Depression era Robin Hood is exactly that. And so, but the idea for Grandma that on Christmas having a store-bought turkey is just, you don't do that.
That's just wrong.
No, you do not. This, I said, this looks like a store-bought turkey, and he convinced her that he shot the turkey.
Clear through the head.
Clear through the head. That's why there's no buckshot. There's no nothing there. That's why it's all nice and clean. And, he's teasing her. She's not having any of it. But, yeah, she definitely was a force to be reckoned with the family. But it's like she has this wonderful comedic timing. She could only play that without the comedy chops. And, we've seen her like in I Love Lucy.
Mm-hmm.
And going all the way back to It's a Wonderful Life. And, she can play the sweet grandma, but she was the one saying, there are way too many sweet people here. We need some sour. And that's how she... Yeah,
I'm glad she made that bold choice.
Yeah.
And I'm glad Earl said, okay.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think he could have said no to her.
No, and I think that was part of their history, is that when she had ideas, because she was a script girl in the old days. In Hollywood, she came out here. She was working in the studios. She knew, the script structure and everything. She knew what worked and what didn't.
Yeah.
She also worked. She worked for Tex Ritter.
Oh.
So when the series began and John Ritter played Reverend Fordwick, they hit it off perfectly because they were like, "I worked with your dad," and that was the connection. So Richard Thomas and John Ritter were thick as thieves, and she also adored him.
Okay.
But
are we going to see a new Walton series?
I'm thinking that this is the way that it's been planned out. It looks like they're setting it up, and it's going to be maybe a little different than the Waltons we know.
Well, it would have to be. It
would have to be. Yeah, I mean, it was 50 years later, but it looks like they have plotted the course for what direction the Walton children will go to. Obviously, Jason's still a musician, but the other ones will probably be taking different paths.
Looking at a story through 21st century eyes is going to be a different story.
And ideally, they'll be able to tell the stories that Earl Hamner couldn't back in the day, and hopefully they will have the same heart. Because I have to say, when we watched it the other night, there's a lot of stuff going on in our lives. It was a wonderful escape.
It was. There's
a lot of stuff going on in the world and all that. And there are certain themes that carry over, like you said, family and just the importance of, what's important this time of year. But, so for 2 hours, it was just feel good time also. It was just really good.
Much needed.
But I think, now that it's 50 years later, I think we're looking at something and say, wow, this was the start of something really big.
Yes, it was.
And this was the groundwork for something that, for years later, we would be tuned into on Thursday nights to watch this family and going through the Depression and going into World War II and the happy days and not to be confused with happy days, but the good times. No, not to be confused with good times. The good, the bad, and before I sound like the Facts of Life theme.
Real life.
Real life. You got to experience the real life events, and hopefully they, if they want to try to do this again, probably gonna have some really pretty people. We had Logan Schroyer from This Is Us, and Bellamy Young from Scandal as their mother, Olivia. So you do have a very handsome Walton family here. I mean, there's like gorgeous Waltons. Not that the first round was, but
they were salt of the earth.
They were salted
people.
Well, I think that's the thing about the homecoming. There is a certain level of grit that I don't think continued on. I mean, that house looks like John Walton built it with his 2 hands. It looks like Jason is wearing John Boy's hand-me-downs, and they are barely making it. But the most important thing is that they are in a house that is full of love, and that love comes through. And I guess to wrap it up, one very important staple with the Waltons in The Homecoming and Forever was an element from Earl Hamner's real life growing up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The walls of that house were incredibly thin. So when you were upstairs, no matter where you were upstairs, you could hear everything. So you had no privacy. If you were in one room, you heard what was happening in the next room, and the room next to that. You could hear everything. And that part of his house growing up carried over. And you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. That is the origin of the Goodnights, because they were all in their beds, all in their rooms, and they could carry conversations because the walls were so thin. And that is how the Hamners would end their day, and usually the father would have to say, "Okay, go to sleep," and right,
Yep.
But that's how it worked, and it is probably the most memorable part of this. Richard Thomas said he knows when he dies, he knows what the headline's going to be.
Good night, John Boy.
Good night, John Boy. So I think that is the best way. You can listen to us on TV Confidential. You can read my blog, childthetelevision.blogspot.com. Good night, Donna.
Good night, Tony. Stay tuned.